Welcome to our live event. This is the Yukon Project. Today we're going to talk about high yield savings account, and we hope that by the end of this presentation, every single one of you will have a high yield savings account. That's our goal. We're going to tell you why you want one, why you need one, and how you should go find one.
Well, Jonathan, it's amazing to me that we're having to talk about this. And let me give you a statistic. At least 80% of the US population that could have a high yield savings account doesn't. And they're defining that at only 3% interest rates. The reality is, if you actually use the over 5%, which is available, it's more like 90+% don't have these. And they are missing out on up to 52 times the return versus their current account. So they're just leaving money on the table. And I think from, the way the Yukon Project thinks about things, we just want to help people maximize what they have so that they can basically live the life that they want. And what more importantly, for the first time in a long time, these high interest savings account are outpacing inflation, which is a big deal, which means your today's dollars are actually worth what they're worth.
In other words, if you're not in a high yield savings account, your money is evaporating.
Yeah.
So let's back up a little bit. Let's back up because let's define what a high yield savings account is, because they may not know.
Okay. Well, I just want to say one thing before we get into. One of the things that I always found interesting is when a lot of people will say, it doesn't cost you anything to do this. I want people to think about it actually cost you something by not doing this. And I think that's a really big lesson. So with that, why don't you break it off for the folks and tell them what it is?
All right, guys. How would you guys define what a high yield savings account is? How do I identify a high yield savings account? How are they different? Where do I find them?
Well, I can give you my opinion on what I know. So a lot of times your bank might actually have one, but they're not going to tell you. So you're going to actually have to research yourself, and then you're going to have to put the money there. The reality is a high yield savings account is basically defined as a savings account that has over 3% interest rates.
So it's as simple as that. A high yield savings account is a savings account. They act very similarly. Now, we'll get into maybe possible restrictions that some of them have, but the bottom line is a savings account is a savings account is a savings account. High yield just means that you're earning more interest than 0.001%, which is what you often get in a checking account or even just a regular day-to-day savings account.
And just remember, banks are not incentivized to tell you about these. So that's why we're here.
Well, but let's be honest about this. They kind of are, they kind of aren't. If they feel like they're at risk of losing your deposits, that's why they do these, right? Because banks need deposits because they need that capital that they can lend to other people and make money. So the reality is banks aren't just doing high yield savings accounts out of the charity of their own heart. Right? The reality is they are trying to attract capital. And if your bank has a high yield savings account, but it's not very competitive, they're just kind of hoping that you will use them without leaving them for someone else. But really the people who are the companies that are offering the highest yields on your high yield savings account, they're doing it because they want your capital. They want your deposits.
Okay, so before you get into the pros and the cons and about how you say these guys, I just have one question. Does the bank brand matter? I just want to get that on the table. Does it matter?
No, bank brands don't matter for high yield savings accounts. They don't matter at all. What matters is being FDIC insured. As long as the bank is FDIC insured, which pretty much all of them are, that's what matters. After that, it's the details. What's the interest rate they're going to pay? What's the minimum balance requirements you're going to have? Are there any fees? And the answers to that should be 4 or 5% interest rate right now, no fees, and no minimum balances. And there's plenty of them out there that do that. Forget about the brand. You can wipe that off and just look at those key facts. The numbers are what matters because that's all that matters to them.
Great. So, hey, let's jump right in. Walker, why don't you walk us through the pros of a high yield savings account?
All right. So obviously, let's be honest. The simplest and the fastest pro that we can talk about is a higher interest rate. And these are compounded daily. Now, that doesn't mean you get interest in your account every single morning when you go in. What often happens is they're compounding the interest by day, but they award that interest at the end of every month. So at the end of every month, you'll see the interest drop into your account based on the, what you've had in the account over the prior 30, 31 days. And when we're talking about higher interest rate, Steve, you said it. I mean, we're talking about sometimes the order of magnitude of 52 times the higher interest rate than you're getting from a regular savings account or even a checking account. The second thing,
amazing. It's almost like I'm amazed that we even have to explain this to people, but please keep going.
Yeah. Okay. So the next pro is obviously the savings are insured by FDIC, right? This is like any other savings account. This is not the same kind of thing that you're dealing with if we're talking about, say, investing in the stock market, which is not guaranteed. If you put money into an FDIC approved high yield savings account, your amount is guaranteed up to $250,000. Most of us don't have that kind of money sitting around. If you do, that's where you can put it. Now, if you've got a joint account with a spouse or significant other, meaning there are two names on that account can be insured up to $500,000. So we're talking about safe money when you're putting it in these high yield savings accounts.
Awesome.
All right. The last one I want to mention is that the funds are liquid. The reason I mention this is because you might think of things like CDs or certificates of deposit, which is another savings tool. And the problem with those are you put your money in and you got to leave your money in there for a specified amount of time, whether it's 6 months or a year, 18 months, in order to earn the higher interest rate on those accounts. High yield savings accounts are not like that at all. They are absolutely liquid funds. That means that you can get at that money anytime you need to. And that's a real boon because obviously, most of us, if we have money that we don't need, we should probably be investing it in somewhere. But if we need it, we need access to it when an emergency comes up or when we just need to access it.
So a great example might be, Nathan, if we're looking to have like 6 months of safety liquid assets, this would be a great place to put it, right?
Absolutely. This isn't somewhere that you just need, want to keep $100 or something. But of course, you could do that. But when you're looking for that 6 month liquid thing, that standard savings plan, if you will, for your safety net, that's exactly where this should be. It's liquid, so you can get at it anytime you want. But it's not somewhere where it's easy to access. So you're going to go out there, you're going to let it grow, you're going to let it build, but you can get it no matter what happens. If something happens and you need it, go out and grab it, move it over to your checking account so you can use it. And there's no fees or penalties on it like there would be a CD.
It's awesome. All right. So you've given us all the great pros, Jonathan. Why don't you tell us some of these negatives? Because there's got to be some, right? Otherwise, every bit of everybody's money should be in there.
Yeah. Well, so the cons, they're not as many cons as you might think. One of them is it's just the inconvenience of having going to a new bank, right? Most of us are really resistant to change. We're in our groove.
Isn't that a lot easier today? Like you don't actually have to drive 30 minutes down the road, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the reality is almost all of these accounts. In fact, I have not heard of an account that isn't just online, which means transferring the money from one bank to another is fairly easy once you set that up. So there is some inconvenience of not having all your accounts in one place. But here's the reality. You don't get extra points for loyalty to your bank. Bank infidelity may be actually a virtue because the reality is that most companies rely on the fact that once they have you, you're resistant to change. You don't want to change. It's too hard to change. It's too hard to have two accounts. But the reality is, most of the banks that are going to offer the highest yields are the ones that actually want your money. They're the least likely to have your accounts right now. And so you probably are going to find the best deals on the companies that you don't usually deal with right now.
Got it. Awesome.
Maybe even companies that you probably never heard of. A lot of the online banks are banks you haven't heard of, but they're hungry for money. And so that's why they're offering you these great rates. But again, we said brands don't matter. So just move it over, go through the 15-minute process to move it over, put it in that safe place that's acquiring a lot of money. And to me, that's not really a con. That's just hey, you've got to go take the time and do the work.
Yeah. I'll be honest with you. I'll give you a little example from my own life. When we started looking at high yield savings accounts, we actually found one with the bank that has our credit card. So the reality was the highest rate that we got with like sign-on bonuses and whatnot was with a company we already do business with. It made it super easy for us to be in there. All the rails were already established for moving money. And so sometimes it may be more convenient than you think if you just start looking into it.
Awesome.
All right. Next is the inconvenience of daily management. If it's not in the bank that you do your day-to-day banking in, it may be kind of problematic to be moving money back and forth. It may be a little bit of an annoyance, but here's a little secret. It may actually also be a benefit, because if this is your savings account, it's kind of nice to create a little bit of friction so that it's a little bit harder to get at that money to just spend on discretionary things.
And just to be clear, the little bit harder to get at it is 24 to 48 hours.
If that.
Generally speaking, right?
Yes. Yeah. The friction could be as simple as having to open a different app and move the money, or it could be waiting overnight if the money ACHs from one bank to another. So you're right. But for spending, that may be really powerful to know that I got to wait 24 hours to decide whether I really want to make this purchase. So that's a con that could be a positive if you choose to let it be.
Got it.
Finally, there are some high yield savings accounts that have possible restrictions. And that's something you've got to be aware of. The reality is there are accounts that have required minimums that you have to meet. Not many, but there are some. And there are some accounts that have maximum number of transfers that you can do in a month, meaning that they don't want that money to be moving constantly.
That's common with almost all savings accounts, right? That's common table stakes, right?
Yeah. The transfer is actually very common. I mean, my standard bank has the same rule on the checking account or the savings account that I have. I can't move it within the bank more than a few times a month without getting a fee.
And that's the important thing to keep in mind, is that these aren't checking accounts. They're not meant to be kind of money going in daily, in and out, day and day. But that is something you need to be aware of, especially if you're a small business owner and you've got money, a lot of money flows through your accounts, but you need to access it at strange times, unpredictable times. You may not want to try to manage everything out of a high yield savings account, even if you've got a sizable amount of money that you'd love to be earning interest on.
Awesome. So what are some of the things we might want to look out for? Like, is there anything we really need to look out for now?
Yeah. So when you're doing this, one of the things you want to do is you want to look for the fees first, right? And there are possible fees that they might incur. And those fees might be opening an account fee, or what happens if you want to use it with an ATM card. What are the fees that are going to hit you, and are they going to be relevant to you? You want to pay attention to that. You want to make sure that you're aware of the withdrawal frequency limits and make sure that that's not going to cramp the way you do your day-to-day business. And finally, you really want to look at other features that you might want. How hard is it going to be to move the money? Do they have online accounts? What is their ATM policy? Because some of these accounts do have access to ATMs. Others will charge you extra for access to the ATMs. So you just want to be aware of that.
And nowadays, people don't even need ATMs. You just Venmo or Zelle them money, right? It seems like nowadays, right?
Exactly. And that's why it may not be a big thing to look out for. And finally, there are some accounts that have minimum deposit requirements. And that means they don't want you to open an account unless you have $100 or $1,000 or whatnot. Now, most of the ones that you will see, it's not hard to find ones that have a minimum deposit requirement of like $1, just enough to open an account and make it active. But other than that, you don't need to necessarily look out for things. What I will say is one of the things that you probably want to be aware of is any bonuses that you could earn. There are accounts that will essentially give you a bonus if you meet a certain minimum for like 90 days. If you hit a certain minimum, they'll give you a bonus at the end of that. And that could boost the yield that you get in that year if you make sure of that. All right.
So let me ask a question here.
Go ahead.
What was this? Did we lose Steve?
We lost Steve, and now I've got problems. Oh,
we found him again.
He's back.
All right. So let me ask this question then. We've talked a lot about them. Where do you find a high yield savings account? How do I go about getting one, especially if they're online? What's the best way to do that?
So, this is going to sound awfully self-serving, but the Yukon Project actually has a page where you can go in and check rates for half a dozen banks right off the bat. It's probably the easiest way to go to find something that compares, that allows you to kind of see what their feature sets are. And it gives you an idea of the banks you may never have heard of. Now, you could just start Googling banks, but Nathan, to your point earlier, you don't know the bank you've never heard of that really wants your deposits and is offering 5.25%.
Right. So you could Google it, but you could just go over, check our page. We've got a few different banks on there right now that are looking for customers to deposit money, and they're going to be offering 4 or 5% interest rates already.
Yeah, and here's what I will say, because we don't know when people might watch some of these videos. One of the things you got to be aware of is high yield savings accounts, the actual interest rate will change, and it will change without notice. So if something happens in macroeconomic terms, or if a bank no longer needs deposits, they may drop your yield from 5.25% to 4% and then to 3%. So you want to keep an eye on it. But the reality is that's not going to change day to day. You don't need to check it daily. Most of the fine print on these high yield savings accounts say that they are likely to change their rates every 90 days. So the reality is, once you get your money in there, it's not like you have to pay attention and that there's going to be some big bait and switch where you put your money in there and the next day it's the interest rates drop to zero. That's not likely to happen.
It sounds like there's no reason not to have a high yield savings account. And if we can just help everybody, it seems like everybody will be better off.
Yeah, there's really only one reason not to have a high yield savings account, and that's if you don't want to save money and you don't mind having your money evaporate. If you're that person, don't have a high yield savings account. Is a great way to see inflation slowly erode the value of your money.
That's awesome. Let's all not get one then. Well, thank you everybody for, just really being passionate about trying to help people improve their financial situation. And what's crazy is this is an easy one. This really is an easy one. You have a savings account. Just choose where you're going to put it.
And honestly, there's no reason not to have more than one savings account. Have a savings account for holiday spending. Have a savings account for your next vacation. It allows you to earmark money and put it in certain places and forget about it so that it's out of sight, out of mind. And that way it's a really good tool for managing your finances.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining.
All right. Thanks everybody.